Welcome, Joss.
Good morning.
Morning. Just to let you know, we are now live, so we have an audience, and they're keen to hear from you. So, if you would like to share your screen, and I'll hang around and make sure that it's working effectively before I disappear, and I'll formally introduce you. I can see
How's that? Is that working okay?
Working perfectly. Do you want to just advance the screen just to make sure that it goes through? Yeah, perfect. Yeah. That works well. Fantastic.
Perfect.
So the second session for today will feature our event partner, actually, Active Insights, and their Chief Technology Officer, Joss Langford, will share his thoughts on getting closer to the world of the patient with IoT thinking. So Active Insights have a virtual booth as well where you can meet with them later on today. You can ask them more direct questions. So we do have Q&A functionality on the right-hand side. So if you've got questions, please drop them in there. But if we don't have time to filter all of the questions, what I'm suggesting is go over to the exhibition area, drop into the booth. You can pick up materials. You can meet with Joss afterwards as well. So on that note, I'll turn over to you, Joss, our presenter for the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak and to share this material with you. So my name's Joss Langford. I'm the Chief Technical Officer at Active Insights. And what I'm going to do today is have a look, more of an engineer's look at how we might be able to use Internet of Things thinking to get closer to the world of the patient. I'm an engineer by background. I spent 15 years in consumer product and service design before moving to the space of health measurement in the last 10 years. So I'll start just give a slide introduction to Active Insights for those of you who aren't aware of us. We're a digital healthcare company. We specialize in the objective measurement of physical behaviors and lifestyles. We do that with our own wearables that we manufacture in the UK and other connected devices. Our customers and clients rely on us to deliver insight and digital health measures themselves, to develop those and to bring those into their studies. We work across multiple areas in the health space, not just clinical trials. We've got a strong background in public health and academic research, and also support health management. So that body of work has created over 700 peer-reviewed scientific papers, and our devices are used in over 100 clinical trials. So we have over a decade of experience in the measurement, analysis, management, and understanding of behavioral data. But in addition to the role that I have with Active Insights, I also have committee chair positions in two non-profit organisations. One of those is My Data, an award-winning international non-profit that seeks to empower individuals by improving the human centricity of personal data management, how they can use their data or data about them to improve their lives. And the second one is with Oasis. Oasis is one of the leading open standards bodies, and I've worked with them on one of their committees as a co-chair to develop standards around the movement of data about people within the Internet of Things. And what I wanted to do in the talk today is to bring together these two perspectives alongside some of the clinical insights that we've already heard from Bart. So here's a definition for the Internet of Things that I might use as an engineer. Ubiquitous, connected, sensing and computing. So ubiquitous, around us all the time. I don't think we're there yet, but it's clear that that is the direction of travel within the Internet of Things, that are connected to the Internet and that allow us to collect information and process that information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick through these four words essentially and look for lessons about how we might be able to get closer to the world of the patient by understanding what goes on in IoT thinking. I like to think about this as a transformative process. So ubiquity is about the stuff that's around us, around our patients all day, every day. And it's a thinking process that's going to change. And so we've got a movement here from and to. And the first one is a dig back actually my own slides. I introduced remote monitoring as something we specialize in. If we're going to take a truly patient perspective view on this, that's not remote, that's home-based for them. And in other sectors which are very used to working in this way, you can see as the as the area matures, that they move over to this way of thinking. Nurses don't do remote monitoring visits, they do home visits. Occupational health is centered within the workplace. So we define about where we're going to work, rather than where we're not working, so rather than it being not the clinic. And I think that this is a mindset shift that will help us become more human-centric in our thinking. Another one is to think about the move from scalable to pre-scaled. We often get asked a question about the scalability of our technologies at Active Insights, and we're very proud that we've worked in public health, and so we have supported studies in tens of thousands of patients or subjects, but that's still tiny compared to the level of pre-scale technology that's already available within the Internet of Things. Linked to that, though, is a challenge. If we start to use more standardized approaches, then we lose the opportunity to be as bespoke as we're used to being, and we have to think about being more off the peg in our thinking. This last transformation, or the second last one, is about the patient. It's about the individual. It's about moving from presenting them something new to recognizing where we can present them something that they already know about. Where IoT technologies become more ubiquitous, we know that patients and individuals will have seen them before. How do we use those lessons? And then lastly, more of an engineer's one, we're thinking here about moving as we embrace that interconnected world from just measurement to a measurement system. And so then there are some lessons that we can draw from that, I think, immediately. Human-centric design is needed for us to understand the world of the patient, and we need to do this early in the protocol. And I deliberately use the term human-centric design. I mean, it's where I come from a design background, but it also emphasizes the fact that we're talking about the individual in their home environment as an individual first and as a patient second. Standards can help us to reduce risk, costs, and timescales, but there are always compromises. And when I talk about standards here, it may be as simple as using a standard type of watch strap, right the way through to general open standards for moving data around the place through to regulated standards. So standardized approaches rather than necessarily formal standards. IoT examples can help us to identify how to reduce cognitive burden, this shift between new and known. And we need to think about considering the product and service together in the whole person journey. Just as we close out a little view on ubiquity there, this is a diagram that I've used within the IoT space for the last 10 years. And it sort of talks about the world of connected things. And it's very tempting for us to think about this starting from the wearable space. And we might want to think about the Internet of Belonging, sort of a BYOD type system. But actually, individuals interact with the world in many other areas and start to create data in many other areas. And I would suggest that as we move forward in this space, we will start to recognize how we can use wider data sources and bring those to bear within our studies. Bart mentioned earlier some of the work from the DIME group, and this is a slide from their playbook, from the Digital Clinical Measures playbook, which we were very proud to be part of last year. And this is a slide that defines the anatomy of a digital sensing product. And there are clear analogies here between this and the FDA digital health technology paper that was draft paper that was published at the end of December. And I put this up just to start to talk about and show you some of the aspects that are important here. We are talking here about sensing products, so we're going beyond or more narrow than the scope of a digital health technology. We've got a digital health technology which has a sensing element. That sensor interacts with an environment. Our IoT product will have some hardware associated with it. That may have algorithms on board or may not, and I'll talk about that. It'll have different ways of transferring data from itself back to the rest of the world. And at some point, it will likely to be interacting with more general computing systems as well. And all those aspects are really important about how we think about the Internet of Things. We've got specific devices interacting with more general devices in an interoperable way. So just addressing that section in the middle there about what do we mean by directly or indirectly connected. And a very strict definition of an IoT product requires that it's both discoverable and addressable. And the IP Internet Protocol version would be a number that you can find it by. And in our studies, we probably don't want our products to be universally discoverable. And we don't normally need them to be permanently connected. And that connectivity then may be established in a range of different ways. It may be through the patient's device or a study-provided device, a laptop or a smartphone. It could be through a home hub, or it could actually still be within a study centre. And at different levels of connectivity, we can still take very valuable lessons from Internet of Things thinking. So picking up a little on that connectivity point a little bit further, it's worth having a think about real time and how much of that is really needed. I would define that real-time continuous measurement is a transformative aspect of these home-based approaches. This is the thing that really makes a difference. Near real-time management and quality data can dramatically support studies, particularly around risk control, but only if they're actionable. And we very often see this around aspects of measuring non-wear, for example, where we're very keen to understand how successful we are in deploying the technologies. But if we can't do anything to change that once the study's in progress, we may be just adding a real-time measurement burden that we can't action. And then going a step further out, when we start to deal with an interventional element, it may well be that actual real-time or near real-time participant data itself is needed if I'm going to need the data from one section of a study to inform titration or whatever in a second stage. In all of these aspects, one of the things that we find again and again is critical is upfront understanding what the cadence of the study is. What is the data and the digital cadence of the study before we start specifying what real-time requirements are needed for that. And the reason that's so important is that real-time isn't free. Connectivity needs power and connectivity needs infrastructure. Where it concerns power, that may dictate things around device size or particularly charging. The size of product may impact acceptability, and home charging impacts adherence. And we see this again and again. Once a patient has a reason to take a device off, they are much more likely to forget to fit it again. And on the infrastructure side, infrastructure needs investment and maintenance. And in some ways, it doesn't matter who does the investment and the maintenance. It's either going to be a study burden or a patient burden. And the slide that we saw from Bart around the life cycle planning and all those different versions of iPhones, you can see the sort of burden that arises even out of a BYD approach. And lastly, we risk creating technology bias when we insist on infrastructure that we don't need. And that might be because we're excluding people through their digital literacy, through their social and economic status about what they can afford or where they can afford to live, or just on geography itself. The level of interconnectivity that we have in society varies massively between rural and urban populations, and we see this very strongly in our public health work. So just drop back quickly to the slide that I shared earlier. Another way to look at this is about the information that's generated from this world of connected things. A lot of the standards that we might see in the IoT space are driven in this machine-to-machine space on the left-hand side. But everything from the right-hand side of that is creating data about people. And one of the things that we need to recognize is that IoT products author personal data automatically. And this has profound impacts about how we think about managing that data. And again, Bart started to talk about this very early at the bottom of the pyramid about how we manage data. Because those data are behavioral. They also describe what the patient actually does rather than what they say they do. So not only is that data very close to them as an individual, they may not necessarily know exactly what they're sharing. This objective behavior, however, is transformative, is another one of these transformative factors in our ability to develop insight. But the risks to privacy are obvious, and we need to consider trust as a potential patient burden. So let's just flip quickly to have a look at some of the data principles and rights. And I'm not going to do a whole slide on GDPR, although I have listed some of the GDPR aspects there on the right-hand side. There are regulations in different jurisdictions, and they are somewhat different, but the principles and rights are reasonably consistent. And one of the challenges, one of the areas that I can't suggest that we look to the existing world of IoT and say there are good practices here to copy, is around this management of privacy. It is very difficult to navigate. And again, in the Digital Health Technologies guidance from the FDA, they point out very clearly that we've got to have to be very careful when we're going to use these pre-scale technologies, that we understand their data flows and their business models and make sure they're compatible with our aims. One thing that we see again in this space is that as we develop more digitally enabled systems, individuals start to have the expectation, quite rightly in my opinion, that they can exercise those rights digitally as well. So while we may advance digital thinking for the purposes of the study and collecting more data, we also need to think about those tools for managing the expectations and using that as an opportunity to build trust with patients. So very quickly now, I'm going to take a walk through how we move through the sensor level and the computing side of things. So to start off with, once the software or the computing has done the basic jobs of managing a product, it can then convert raw data or the sensor level data into digital measures using algorithms. These outputs may be meaningful in their own right, or they may become features in larger, more complex statistical or machine learning models. And you start to see this layering effect. Then behavioral events can be identified, characterized, and their classification inferred. So we start to build up from a small amount of data in a time series sense into something that is recognizably walking, and then we can start to label that as walking. We can understand the length of the bout, and we may be able to characterize it in terms of the gait or the step cadence, for example. We can also identify very specific behaviors of interest, as well as these activities of daily living, scratching and tremor. So at this level of algorithm development, this sensor level data is an essential resource for us to be able to create novel algorithms that then can turn into digital health measures that we can validate. And I give an example there of one of our products. And the reason I put it there and with a little description about it is it shows where it sits in the connectivity. This is very loosely connected. It actually exchanges its data in the study center. But we've still been able to apply many aspects and learnings from IoT thinking about how we design both the product and the services around it. Once we understand an algorithm and we've got an algorithm which is validated, we can use a technique from the IoT space called edge computing. And it sounds very clever, but what it says, all it's saying is that we're going to move computing power from our servers to the edge of the network, to the edge of the cloud. And we can do that on devices once algorithms are well defined. So rather than having to pull raw data back from a device, we can rely on that device to process that data reliably. And what this allows us to do is to compress data intelligently to improve connectivity. It makes pseudonymization more effective. And it does that because it removes artifacts from the data that may disclose aspects of identity that we don't fully understand. It minimizes the data that we collect, and this in turn helps us to build patient trust. Data minimization is a really, really important tool here because as I sit down with a patient, I can explain exactly what this device can report and what it cannot report. And that's very powerful in allowing the patient to understand the risks that this device might pose to their privacy. And again, here's an example of one of our devices that allows us to implement algorithms in the field and to be able to get those returns and benefits in terms of very long running times without charging. So lastly, one last aspect of connectivity, and that's to think about connected computing. IoT thinking relies on this network effect of infrastructure, and we will not own all of that infrastructure. And we're very used to that as we interact with the internet. And this relies on interoperability, and we use technical standards to do this. And as well as allowing us to access IoT technologies, embracing interoperability allows us to simplify data integration from multiple sources. Interoperability allows us to reduce our reliance on a single vendor, on a single product. It reduces lock-in. So there's risk that Bart put up again about that technology evolution slide as we see technologies evolve. If we concentrate on the integration of the data and interoperability between systems, we reduce our dependence on any one technology. And lastly, and most importantly, in the context of this talk, interoperability enhances human centricity through data portability. So within my work with my data, we work very closely with the EU on aspects of their data legislations, and we've been working closely on the recent Data Governance Act. And the Data Governance Act doesn't change GDPR, it adds to it, and it brings interoperability into the play about how different data spaces exchange data. And going forward, we understand that we're going to be moving towards data rights acts within the EU as well, and it's likely that they will impact GDPR and enhance this requirement for data portability. From a patient's perspective, that starts to give them the opportunity where they have participated in the creation of data with us, of being able to use that data in different areas. So lastly then, what we can do then is we move round from talking in the beginning about ubiquitous technology to ubiquitous data, all day data, everyday data. Once we've extracted sequences of events from sensor level or onboard processed data, we can build patterns of an individual, patterns of lifestyle, activity levels, bout patterns, temporal patterns. We can understand these as aspects of phenotype, potentially, where we know that those have got a genetic component. And when we start to see the patient then in the whole, within their environment, we start to really understand and see the world of the patient in the data itself. And we can understand how our interventions or how disease change that over time. And this last point, I'd love to say at this stage that it's transformative. I don't think it is yet, but I think it's coming. And that's the understanding that when we collect data all day in the patient environment, the information that we get is transformative in how we understand them. And again, we see that this gives us opportunity to be able to segment patient populations, to think about how we use that in our stratification of treatment, or potentially in clinical trials about how we enrich our studies. So to close out, I've used just 4 words there that are central to the Internet of Things to help us think about how we can use that thinking to make our studies more human-centric by getting closer to the world of the patient. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Joss. Great presentation. And just to remind the audience, we do have a portion now where we can take questions. If you have any specific questions, just drop them in the Q&A box. So if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a box which says Q&A. Just drop the questions in there. We can read through them and then we can pick them. I would encourage you to ask questions now. So yeah, if you've got specific questions, the whole of the audience is keen to hear about the challenges other people are facing and how they could potentially be solved. So it is worthwhile for the purpose of everyone. If you've got specific questions and you don't want to do it online and you want to take it offline, then feel free to drop over to the booth, and on the left-hand side, click on booth and just enter into it, and you can meet with Joss and the team over there as well. Just to kick things off then, so we do have a first question. Does IoT have to mean wireless technology infrastructure?
I don't think it does. I mean, I think it's a question of definitions, really. Wireless may have more utility in certain circumstances, but in the strictest definition that I shared earlier, a wired camera, which was addressable and discoverable, is closer to being an IoT device than something that measures within the home necessarily. And I don't think it matters. The point of the presentation is to understand what learning that we can bring. And I think that we can use these technologies appropriately within our study wherever we draw the line between what is a true IoT device or not. And in the 2 examples that I gave from our portfolio, there's a clear difference in how IoT-like those products are, but they don't stop them being very effective in studies.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question from Kimberly. What do you see as the biggest barrier moving from large digital data to utility in clinical trial design?
I think one of the challenges about understanding the data that we collect is that we're collecting it for a specific purpose. And that purpose that purpose is controlled through regulation, and the permissions that we have to use that data are controlled. And so what you see in the world generally at the moment is that there's a large amount of siloing of data, and often for very good reason, because that data is not permissioned for that particular use. And I think one of the lessons that we need to be aware of as we move into our clinical trials is that the data from a previous study is very valuable in how we design a future study. It may even be clinically valuable as well. So it's not necessarily a barrier right now, but I think as we move forward, if we don't address how we think about siloing data in different study areas and allowing ourselves to bring data together, and working with individuals to understand their concerns about privacy and doing that within both the expectations and the regulations, that will become a barrier to progress, or it will hinder the speed at which we can move into this space.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks for answering those questions. So that does bring us to time, perfectly timed, Joss. So thank you very much for that. So on that note, I think we'll move on to the next presentation. So thank you very much, Joss. Great presentation, by the way. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. As mentioned earlier, Active Insights, they do have a virtual booth, so you can meet with the team to find out more. Drop in throughout the networking breaks. You can pick up any of the downloads and content information they've got in there. But you can also sit in the waiting room and you can ask to be for a meeting. So you can schedule a meeting at any time throughout the day. I'm sure Joss and the team will be more than happy to sit down and have a conversation with you. The facility is quite sophisticated, so you can actually sit down and have a face-to-face meeting in a Zoom team-style environment. So please do drop by and have those conversations. On that note, once again, thank you very much, and we'll move on to the next session. See you in a few minutes.